Okay, as I said, make sure you keep this chart of the councils with you. It will be very helpful as we move forward. And what we're going to do, as I was going through the notes preparing for today's lecture, I decided that we're going to follow a pattern similar to what we did with Nicaea. I want to give you a little bit of background first, because there are a lot of things going on prior to Constantinople. So we'll talk about that today. It should be a comparatively brief study today. Next week we will look at the Cappadocian Fathers themselves, and if we have enough time, we'll get into the council, but if we can't, then the following week we'll get into the Council of Constantinople and one of the primary, probably the main issue that they addressed, and that is Apollinarianism. We talked about that a little bit, but we'll get into that. So hopefully, rather than doing one hour and a half Bible study, we'll break it up into manageable bites. Today what we want to do is we want to look at everything that is leading up to the Council of Constantinople. We saw last week that Nicaea and Orthodoxy claimed victory. Well, the victory of the Council of Nicaea over the views of the majority of bishops was a victory in appearance only. And it didn't last very long. Some of the bishops have subscribed to the homoousios concept with reluctance, Eusebius of Caesarea being one of them. Some from regard for Constantine himself. And there will be three main issues that are going to come out of our discussion today. I will summarize them at the end, but I want you to pay attention because they bear with us to this very day. And some at best signed it with reservation of a very, very, very broad interpretation. And with the change of circumstances, they would readily turn in opposition, and that is what happened. However, there was an immediate period of great excitement that ensued. Yes, Orthodoxy has triumphed, during which all of a sudden, council was held against council, creed was set against creed, and anathemas were set against anathemas, hurled everywhere. As I mentioned earlier, the pagan Ammianus Marcellinus, you don't have to write his name down,
Thank you.
says of the councils under Constantine, the highways were covered with galloping bishops.
Yeah.
And this was so prevalent that even Athanasius commented, saying this is a ridiculous and restless flutter of clergy journeying over the empire to find the true faith, and he provoked the ridicule and contempt of the unbelieving world by pointing this out. In intolerance and tolerance, the Arians far exceeded the Orthodox. They contested elections of bishops frequently, and in most instances, these contested elections of the episcopate wound up in bloodshed. The interference of imperial politics only poured oil on the flame and embarrassed the natural course of the theological development. And you will see how Constantine's attempted benign, benevolent involvement opened the door for a mess. The personal history of Athanasius was interwoven with the doctrinal controversy. He threw himself single-mindedly into the cause for which he advocated. The question whether his disposition was legitimate or not, deposition, not disposition, was legitimate or not, was almost identical with the question whether the Nicene Creed should prevail. So not only was the creed being questioned, but it was the actual person himself Eusebius of Nicaea. Remember our buddy Eusebius, who was originally siding with Arius and was one of the abstention and then reluctantly signed. And Theognis of Nicaea, you don't have to remember Theognis, through all their influence against the adherents of homoousia, or orthodoxy. Constantine himself, mind you, this is why I have him as orthodox in quotes. You will remember at the beginning and at the conclusion, he was in favor of homoousios and the Nicene Creed. Well, he was turned by Eusebius of Caesarea, who stood between Athanasius and Arius. Remember, Eusebius' position was kind of moderate. I'm going to agree to the use of homoousios, but not according to your understanding of same essence, because that smacks of Sabellianism. So he's kind of trying to part a middle way. Hopefully that's not somebody called in the church. Not only was Constantine swayed by Eusebius, he was also swayed by his own sister, Constantia. They couldn't get away from the cons.
Can't think of any names in those
Constantia.
Once you're in, you can't get
Yeah. And by a vague confession written by Arius to think more favorably. Constantine was encouraged to think more favorably of Arius and to recall him from exile. So Constantine began as Orthodox, siding with the Orthodox, switched sides. Athanasius, who, after the death of the bishop of Alexandria, Alexander in 328, became the bishop of Alexandria, and he was the head of the party of Nicaea. He refused to reinstate the heretic Arius to his former position as a priest. And Athanasius was condemned and disposed for false accusations by two Arian councils. Here we go with the competing councils. One at Tyre under the bishop and historian Eusebius of Caesarea, and the other at Constantinople in the year 335, or 336, depending. And he was banished by Emperor Trebes, T-R-E-B-S, in Gaul in 336. The charge was a disturber of the peace of the church, and this was Athanasius' first banishment. Soon after this, Arius, having been formally acquitted of the charge of heresy by the council at Jerusalem in 335, was to have been solemnly received back into the fellowship of the church at Constantinople. Not only was it supposed to be a legal edict, he was supposed to be received in honor. But on the evening, I love this, God has such a great sense of humor. But on the evening before the intended procession in the imperial palace to the Church of the Apostles, Arius suddenly died, 336, at the age of 80 plus, because of an attack, something similar to cholera, where he went to the bathroom and died on the toilet. God has a sense of humor. This death was regarded by many as divine judgment. By others, it was attributed to poisoning by his enemies. By others, to the excessive joy of Arius in his triumph. Take your pick.
excessive joy.
Take your pick.
Any
Whatever
of
the
above
case,
could be done.
Whatever the case, he had a call of nature and never finished. At least this side of the veil. On the death of Constantine at 337, the empire splits. Shortly after Constantine was baptized, very shortly after he was baptized, there are accounts that actually indicate he was baptized virtually on his deathbed. Eusebius of Nicaea, the Arian, Athanasius was recalled from his banishment by that's supposed to be, Constantine II. We'll get to that in a minute. He's not up there, but we'll get to him in a second. Constantine II is only there briefly because he died very quickly. But Athanasius is recalled, so he is reinstated. And he is received by the people with great enthusiasm, and according to Gregory of Nazianzus, more joyously than ever an emperor was received. Yay, yay, go Athanasius. And some months afterwards, at 339, there was a council held where nearly 100 bishops in Alexandria were present for the vindication of the Nicene doctrine. So, victory, defeat. Victory, once again, very short-lived. In the East, Arianism prevailed. This will come back to haunt the church for many years. Constantius, the second son of Constantine II was obviously the elder, he was the ruler in the East, and together with his whole court was attached to the fanatical intolerance of the Arians. Eusebius of Nicaea was made bishop of Constantinople and was the leader of the Arian in kind of the more moderate party, but his behavior does not indicate that. And these Arians were generally considered less consistent and more semi-Arian, but the fact of the matter is, regardless of how you massage it, they were Arians. And they were vehemently opposed to Athanasius and to the West. Athanasius was, for a second time, deposed. And he took refuge with Bishop Julius of Rome between 339 and 340. So he went all the way from the east to the west, who in the autumn of 341, Bishop Julius, remember I mentioned there was a council of Rome, he held the council of more than, notice the diminished number of bishops, more than 50 bishops, in defense of the exile for the condemnation of his opponents. The whole Western Church was in general more steadfast on the side of Nicene orthodoxy, and they honored Athanasius as a martyr of the true faith. On the contrary, while Julius orders Council of Rome, there was a council there was a synod at Antioch held under the direction of Eusebius, of the Eusebians, Caesarea and Nicaea, on the occasion of the dedication of a church, and listen carefully, in 341 AD, they issued 25 canons, not canons, indeed which were generally accepted as orthodox and valid, but at the same time confirmed the deposition of Athanasius and set forth 4 creeds which rejected Arianism yet avoided the orthodox formula of homoousios. Again, trying to steer a middle path. And thus, the seeds of the conflict between the East and the West are manifest. And this lays the foundation for further issues that will ultimately wind up dividing the church. Now, to heal this, the 2 emperors, Constantius and his brother, Constans, sounds like a soap opera, Constans, in the West, summoned a general council at Sardica, Sardica, in Illyria, at 343. And here, the Nicene party and the Roman emperor's influence prevailed. Note the interference, no, let me not say interference, note the interposition of the emperors as we go along. They are going to become very prominent in these theological discussions. Now, Pope Julius was not present at this council in Sardica at 343, but he was represented by two Italian priests. Paisan, hey. The Spanish bishop Hosius presided over the council. The Nicene doctrine was confirmed, and 12 canons were at the same time adopted, some of which actually apply to us today in reference to discipline and authority. But the Arianizing Oriental bishops, dissatisfied with the readmission of Athanasius, took no part in the proceedings. They were apparently the State Congress of Texas, and they left. And they held their own council in the neighboring city of Philippopolis, good luck with that, and confirmed the decrees of the Council of Antioch, which banished Athanasius. So the opposite councils therefore inflamed the discord of the church instead of allaying the problems. Constantius was compelled indeed by his brother Constans to restore Athanasius. And the wheel keeps turning. He was restored to his office, Athanasius was, in 346. But after the death of Constans in 350, Constantius summoned 3 successive synods in favor of the moderate Arian position, one at Sirmium in Pannonia in 351. You don't have to write these names, I'll share them with you. One at Arlette or Arles in Gaul in 353, and one in Milan, thank God for a simple word, in 355. He forced the decrees of these councils on the Western Church, deposed and banished bishops like Liberius of Rome, Hosius of Cordova, Hilary of Poitiers. And I don't know who named this bishop this. His parents must have been insane. But Lucifer of Calaris was deposed. His family must have been drunk when they named him. And they resisted Constantius, but Constantius drove Athanasius from the Cathedral of Alexandria during divine worship with 5,000 armed soldiers, and supplied his place with an uneducated, this quote is from Philip Schaff, an uneducated, avaricious Arian, George of Cappadocia. Athanasius was deposed in 356, the third time. Thus, Arianism gained the ascendancy in the entire Roman Empire, and you'll see why in just a second, because it looks like there's a split, but you'll see why. So Arianism gains the ascendancy in the entire Roman Empire through political involvement and the imposition of imperial authority, not theological debate. Though not in its original rigorous form, still the milder form of homoi ousios, of similar essence, the doctrine of similarity, as opposed to homoousios, of the same essence, was what Constantius was advocating, but both of these are better than the third one, heterousios, which means no way, no how, he ain't nothing like God. this becomes an actual party, theological party, which we will mention in a moment. So by 356, Constantius had put down, apparently, Nicene orthodoxy. But, like any good church, they split into two factions. They separated to the right wing, which was the Eusebians, or the Semi-Arians, and they were represented by Basil of Ankara and Gregory of Laodicea. They maintained that the Son was of similar essence to the Father. So they rejected homoousios, same essence, but advocated similar essence. To these belonged many who at heart, and this is something that's very critical, agreed with the Nicene faith, but either harbored prejudice against Athanasius. We don't like him, so we're not going to follow. Doesn't matter what he teaches might be true. Or they saw in the term homoousios the legitimate concern of the revival of Sabellianism. So, in a number of these cases, there was legitimate theological concern for what was taking place. It wasn't simply the knee-jerk, unless you didn't like Athanasius, but it wasn't generally the knee-jerk reaction. It's just like, no, that's it. You believe that, we're going to believe the other thing. That's another point. So we've now covered 2 points, and I want you to keep these in mind. One is the imperial involvement, and 2 is now the understanding of terms. So, with the rejection of homoousios, but sticking to homoi, of like essence, the right settled. The left wing, on the other hand, were decided Arians. And these guys actually broke into 2 additional factions. Under the leadership of Eudokius of Antioch, yeah, I know, hey, you're dealing with Greeks and Latins, and his deacon Aetius, A-E with an umlaut, and Tius, and then especially the bishop Eunomius of Cyzicus, like those terms. They were taught that the Son was not homoousios, wasn't of the same essence. He wasn't homoousios, he wasn't even similar in essence. He was heteroousios, he was totally dissimilar. He was unlike the Father. Notice now what we are encountering again. What was the Greek mindset moving forward at this time? What did we see right before Nicaea? Monarchy. Somebody pulled up the chart a moment ago. What was it? The what?
Instead of Rebecca, Sophia.
Yes, it was Gnosticism. We're back to the Gnostic flavor here. Not similar, not same, not even close.
Just took after his mother.
Yeah, pretty much. Constantius vainly endeavored to suppress this quarrel by his imperio-episcopal power. Suddenly the emperor is now viewed as being a part of the episcopal authority of the church. However, in 361, Constantius dies. And this opened the way for the second and permanent victory of Nicene orthodoxy, which we will get to when we get to the Council of Constantinople. Now, if you're wondering what's going on with all of these names, this is how it breaks down. And you'll see why Constantius forced Arianism on the West. He forced it because he took over this is the succession in the West, right? Constantine dies, leaves the emperor to his two sons, one in the east, one in the west. Constantine's mindset was not to have a split empire. His sons were supposed to rule in his stead in unity. Ha ha! If you have a brother, you know how little that happens. So the brothers immediately part company, they pick sides, and this is where you break down. So the West, the East. Now if you'll notice, the West went through a bit more turmoil in imperial succession. Constantine died like 3 years after he took office. Constance lasted 10 years. And then Magnentius, who's not related to the family at this point, but Magnentius only lasts 3 years after Constance. Once he dies, Constantius comes from the east and says, you know what? I'm the Grand Poobah. I'm the head honcho. But he only lasts 2 years. He dies in, well, actually he died 8 years after Magnentius. Julian then takes place. Anybody know what Julian was? I know you do. Anybody know what Julian's appellation was? What they called Julian?
Julian the Apostate.
Julian the Apostate had no brief for Arianism. Julian had no brief for Orthodoxy. Julian wanted pagans to rule everything. Well, fortunately for the church, he only lasted 2 years. Julian lasted, I believe it was until 368. And then, once again, we get a split. Gratian takes over in the west. Valens takes over in 375 in the east. Gratian only lasts, as you can see, 2 years. Valentinian, who was very conservative, very orthodox, didn't make it to the end of the year. And what this does is this opens up the empire for Theodosius. Of all of these names, Theodosius is the one on which we're going to fall because he is the emperor during the Council of Constantinople. Now, we talked about these issues. Number one, what you see here with the emperor's involvement is what we ultimately experience when we battle the issue of the separation of church and state. It started all the way back there. Now there's an interesting subtext to this, because what is one of the titles of Jesus?
Something.
Keep going. Think of Isaiah or Zechariah. Keep going. You're on the right track. Keep going. It's in there.
Prince of Peace.
Keep going. You're right there. Keep going. What's the next one? 2 words that are repeated. King of Kings. Right? Lord of Lords. Now, what is that? See, that's an imperial ruler who also happens to be divine. So the issue that the church had to deal with throughout her history and still does to this day is to what degree do we recognize the unification and separation of church and state. And I'm not going to answer that today, but how you answer that is going to determine whether you're a pluralist or a theonomist.
Oh boy.
Whether all of the state should be ruled by God's laws, or whether the state has the right, under the rule of God, to establish her own laws. I'll let you wrestle with that. But as you can see, it goes all the way back. We mention it here because this is the obvious demarcation between the influence of the emperor on the church or the state and the church, but there is a precedent biblically.
Would we get to give to Caesar what is Caesar's?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to resolve the issue for you today. I have my own opinion. But remember that ultimately, where are we going to end up? What is it that we say? What is it that I say every Sunday? What are we advancing?
Kingdom
God.
of God.
So I want you to think about this, because this is an important issue. The second thing we have to deal with, councils. Remember we said Nicaea was so important because of what it did. It brought to bear the church. And in bringing the church together, established a body that told the church, this is what you have to believe to be orthodox. Remember what the situation was prior to Nicaea. What did we have going on? We had a synod here, we had a council there, we had a synod over there, we had a council behind the barn, we had councils and synods everywhere, right? Nicaea comes along and says, we have now determined the truth. And what happened immediately after they made that pronouncement? The church flipped them off and said, we're going to do what we're going to do. And then we had these battling councils again for how many years? 325 to 381. Right? 56 years, 5 decades of this. I just covered it in 20 minutes. This was a mess. So on the one hand, we look back to Nicaea as the foundation of conciliar decisions, which set the tone for what was going to take place and then ultimately arise in the 1400s with the conciliar movement. But all of the problems are already appearing to the church. And it makes you wonder whether there was a concerted effort in the 1400s to look back at what happened in the early church and say, we need to correct this somehow, because they didn't. I mean, that battle, the conciliar movement, was a substantial battle.
I bet you Sarah Mullally's got an icon of Julian on her wall. No
I
one
think,
back there.
yeah, well, I think she probably has a ram's head sitting on aborted children, but that's just me. And then there's the third issue that I want you to, and I really hope that you wrestle with these things, because these are very important matters to what we experience and what we do today. How many people here come from a Baptist, evangelical, or non-denominational background, experience, or affiliation? Seriously, how many?
Seriously.
All right. Now, let me ask you a question. You're interacting with friends who are Baptist, evangelical, or non-denominational. And you use the term sacrament or Catholic. What is their reaction?
Heathen, going to hell. You believe in the Pope.
And this is
Cannibal.
this is the other, which is a great argument for the real presence of Christ. But anyway, in the Eucharist. Not that we're cannibals, but there's an argument that goes
Just
along
to
with
clear that up for you.
just to make sure. And this is what you see happening here. What was the problem with the term homoousios, right? Now originally, there was this challenge because of Sabellianism. So what winds up happening? The negative connotation attaches itself to the word, and then anytime thereafter the term is used, what happens? There's no analysis, there's no evaluation, there's no attempt at understanding. It's a knee-jerk reaction. So when we talk to our evangelical or our Baptist or our non-denominational friends and we say we're a part of the Catholic Church, what is their reaction? You are a Roman, go away.
Repent, ye vile sinners.
I still say they're afraid that we're going to ask questions that make them examine what they believe and cause some doubt,
Well,
which,
That certainly may be the case, but the initial reaction is a knee-jerk reaction to the term itself.
yeah.
If you say Catholic, it's you can hear it everywhere in conversations. Oh, he's just a Catholic. It drives me crazy. Because that is not what the word means. Our professor of church history made a statement once, and I thought it was so simple that it was brilliant. And he said, the definition of the term Catholic means whole, universal, complete, right? So it's whole or universal. Roman is localized, so you can't have a localized universal. And I was like, okay, I kind of like that. But the fact of the matter is, nobody takes the time.
No.
And we get that today in almost every conversation that we have within the church. People attach historical connotations because they learn something a certain way and they become lazy. And therefore it's much easier to just accept the term as handed down than to actually do some study and to actually do some research. Now you start to hear in some circles, in some evangelical circles, you start to hear an attempt to resuscitate the term Catholic, mostly in the Protestant Reformed circles. You'll see the terms Reformed Catholic being trumpeted around. When the Catholics use it, it means something totally different, of course, because now the Catholics are jumping on that bandwagon, and they're using the term Reformed Catholic or Reformed Catholicity. So be careful when you encounter terms and your initial reaction is to simply react. Simple solution for your own peace of mind. You ask them, what do you mean by that? That would resolve a ton of difficulties, because then it provides you the opportunity to engage them. Well, that's not what we really mean by the term Catholic when we use the term Catholic. All right. Questions?